Hi guys, what is going on, and welcome back to another video. So I'm going to go out on a bit of a limb and say the vast majority of you who are watching this video will have already heard about Ashes of Creation. You know, it's probably one of the most hyped MMOs currently in development, and it's been talked about a lot around on the internet. But despite all my interest in other games in this genre like Amazon's New World, I have never actually released a video looking at Ashes of Creation, despite the fact I've actually been personally following its progress in the background. So I thought it's about time to right this wrong and see if Ashes of Creation is all that it's cracked up to be. So I guess the first question we need to ask is, what is Ashes of Creation? Well, it is an open world MMORPG set in an evolving, ever-changing world which is driven entirely by player decisions. It's going to feature a mix of PvP and PvE content, as well as loads of crafting professions, blacksmithing, shipbuilding, fishing, animal taming, alchemy and loads more. And the cities are going to develop and evolve based on player need and desire through the game's node system, and we'll be covering a bit more about what the node system is later on in the video. The game itself was kickstarted almost 4 years ago now and has reached $3.2 million, but significant funding had already been put into the game prior to the Kickstarter by private investors and by the game's CEO, Stephen Sharif. The game isn't going to feature any upfront costs, there will be no box cost, but they are going to be making use of a subscription model at $15 a month, which is actually kind of nice to see. Very few games seem to use subscription anymore, but it did seem quite a good way of doing it. They have stated multiple times though that there is going to be no pay to win in the game, although there is going to be a cosmetic shop. But they did clarify on a little sort of side note that no pay to win does include faster progression items, so that's things like inventory expansions, also things like experience boosts. So if they stick to that, then that is certainly a factor that really is going to help draw a lot of people into the game, because so many games feature pay to win now. The game is currently in Alpha 1 testing, but that is only available for those who have purchased some of the very expensive founder packs, like $500 expensive, and the content is currently all under NDA. However, there were plans for them to drop the NDA in March, where we are now, to allow more footage to be released to the world and people to be able to see it a bit more. However, this very recently just got pushed back to May as things were not quite ready for release. I kind of get why they've done this. If they don't feel the game is currently polished enough, once sort of content creators and large numbers of people start to get their hands on it, put out opinions, put out content, put out a lot of footage of it, that kind of shapes people's first impressions of the game, and if they don't feel it's quite ready for that yet, I don't think we can hate them too much for pushing that back. But I am looking forward to seeing more footage get released, so hopefully this doesn't get delayed again. So as I said at the start, the game is all about this evolving and ever-changing world, and this has been built up and developed around the node system. At launch, there is going to be 103 node locations, and these are going to be split up into these 103 regions. They're going to be defined by their geography and kind of the terrain features. As players spend more time, kill more monsters, complete quests, take part in PvP events, gather resources, etc., these nodes are going to build experience and eventually level up. They're going to be starting at a wilderness level with basically nothing there at all, going through camps, villages, towns, all the way up to giant metropolis. However, once a node reaches a village level, it will lock out its immediate surrounding nodes, make them into what they're calling vassal nodes. And that will mean that those surrounding nodes can no longer be leveled up. And in effect, this is going to mean major cities, of which there's going to be 5 metropolises on a server, are going to develop in different locations in each server, because the location of them is going to be determined by where players want to spend their time and where players want to develop main cities. I.e., if a major clan decides they want a metropolis on the coast, and that's where they focus all their efforts on doing all their resource gathering, all their monster killing, then that is more likely to level that node up, and that is where the progress is going to be. As the nodes progress and level up differently, NPCs will start to become available. Merchants, scholars, different trade routes and abilities will all start to unlock for the players, giving them a greater variety of crafting choices and quests. On top of that, as the levels continue to develop, Different world bosses will start to be drawn in, rarer resources might be found, more difficult quests will need to be completing, and this content will be tied to the type and geography of the region in which the node developed. So for example, if you're on a coast and there's a large amount of water in the node, then you're more likely to expect sea monsters or sea-based world bosses than you are if you're up in the mountains where you might be able to expect dragons. So that some of the world events and things that are going to happen are going to be tied to specific servers. On top of this, the nodes themselves are going to be split up into 4 different types: economic, militaristic, scientific and divine. Depending on the type of node developed, they'll convey very different bonuses to the players. For example, an economic metropolis will allow players access to a global market rather than just the regional one they would normally have access to. A scientific metropolis will allow for fast travel within its region of influence, which in a game with almost no fast travel and a very large world is going to be a very significant boost. So what about PvP? A topic that has just so plagued New World since it moved away from the survival side of the MMO. So how is it going to be handled by Ashes of Creation? Well, there are quite a few PvP features, from things like the caravan raid system, to node sieges, guild wars, duels, battlegrounds and arenas. But I think for me, the caravan PvP system is perhaps the most interesting feature. As I said above, with the exception of the economic metropolis, all resources and markets are localised to a specific node. And as we said at the start, different nodes will have different levels of resource availability depending on the geography, area and specific conditions, i.e. a mountain node may have more mining resources. Obviously though, the real money is going to be made selling those ores and mining resources far away in a coastal node, but they have to be transported by caravans to get there because the markets are localised. And this is where the PvP opportunities arise in caravan raids, as players can choose to attack or defend these caravans as they travel between nodes and try and overwhelm the guards and loot the resources. So you're probably going to have the option to hire players as mercenary guards to try and protect these caravans, or you can try and go raiding them to try and steal and loot their resources. The other big PvP aspect is node sieges. This is where players get an opportunity to attack and attempt to destroy the bigger nodes in the game, such as laying siege to Metropolis in a huge 250v250 player battle. If successful, the node would get destroyed and it would be reset right back down to 0. Players who had resources stored there would lose a large chunk of them, and any player made housing would be completely destroyed. This is where the big changes would occur in the world, as with the destruction of a huge metropolis, loads of new nodes would become unlocked, a new city could spring up anywhere, and that's what made node sieges such an important part of the evolving world. This slightly reminds me of if you've ever seen where you get news articles on EVE Online where there's been an enormous space battle and tens of thousands of pounds worth of virtual spaceships have been lost, and that's kind of what I imagine these node sieges to be like. These are the real important battles on the server. These are the server changing events where everyone gets together to sort of duke it out, and the ramifications of winning or losing a siege are going to have a real big impact on how the server evolves. If, however, you're not into PvP, then do not worry, because there is still an absolute boatload of PvE content for you to get stuck into, with a lot of classic MMO stuff like dungeons, raids, some of which will be instants, but the vast majority of which will have to be found in the open world, and are going to be designed to be between 8 and 40 players. There will also be node quests and tasks, as well as a more story-driven main quest, but don't forget, these are all tied up to the success or failure of the node that you are in. Want to unlock more high-level dungeons and raids? Then the node needs to be leveled up. More resources to farm or higher tier quests? The node needs to be leveled up. Want to continue to explore and develop the lore of your node? Then, yep, you guessed it, the node needs to be leveled up. Hopefully you can see now why I talked about the node system at the very start, because the whole game is built around it. The types and styles of PvE content that gets unlocked, the type of dungeons that become available are all dependent on the area that you start to level that node and its progression throughout the game. This is just an extremely brief overview of what Ash's creation is actually about. But what is it that actually makes it successful? Why so much hype, and why are people predicting it to be the next big MMO? I think there are actually a few reasons for this. Firstly, the MMO scene hasn't been very good for quite a while now, and people actually want a new game to get stuck into. Ashes of Creation fulfills a lot of hopes and dreams in that regards, and I think people just actively want it to be successful so they can actually get a game to sink their teeth into. Secondly, I think that development has so far been very player focused, not only taking on board player feedback and making changes, but also the developers having a good awareness of what features are important to MMO players and incorporating them into the game. I think this is in partly with Stephen Sharif being an MMO player himself. He knows what he's looking for in a game, much more than many AAA studios themselves actually do, and I think that's something that so far has been showing in the development. Finally, the game actually started with a fairly decent budget and realistic time expectations, despite the fact that it recently got delayed again, but we're glossing over that. I think this comes together to make one of the potentially most interesting upcoming MMOs we've had for a long time, and certainly one I can't wait to get into and try out. But that's all we've got time for now, so hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, do let me know what you think in the comments down below. Of course, subscribe to the channel because we're certainly going to be having more Ashes of Creation content as more news gets released and as we head closer towards getting a playable alpha. Thanks for watching guys, and I shall see you all on the next video.